Naples has a median home price of $641,972. About 200 miles north, a Panhandle County seat is selling comparable homes for under $160,000. That gap isn't only about square footage or ocean views. It's the difference between paying property taxes for the rest of your life and eventually paying almost none. Florida has a rule built into its tax code that only works if the home you buy is valued under $250,000. Miss that number and the door closes for good, no matter your age or income. Hit it, and after 25 years as a resident, your county and municipal taxes can shrink to nearly zero. This video covers 20 small inland Florida towns where that math works in a retiree's favor, using current home prices, cost of living, and hospital ratings for each one. Some of these towns hand you strong healthcare and a low price tag together. Others make you choose one over the other. We'll move through 4 regions: the Panhandle, North Florida, Central Florida, and the Nature Coast. And by the end, you'll know exactly which towns get you both and which ones ask you to trade. Here are 20 rural Florida towns retirees should know about in 2026. Chipley. Chipley sits in the sandhills of Washington County, and in 2026, the median home price is roughly $200,000, down slightly from the year before and comfortably under the state's exemption threshold. Cost of living runs about 15% below the state average, which stretches a fixed income further than the raw home price suggests. The local hospital, Northwest Florida Community Hospital, carries a 1-star rating from Medicare, though it includes a 34-bed skilled nursing unit and handles emergency stabilization on site. For anything beyond that, Panama City is about 45 miles south, close enough to keep as a backup without living inside it. What Chipley offers instead is quiet, spring-fed leisure lakes and stretches of longleaf pine forest that surround the town on nearly every side. The kind of scenery that doesn't show up in a spreadsheet but shows up every morning outside the window. For a retiree weighing price against everything else, Chipley leans hard toward price and asks you to accept the trade. Marianna. Marianna calls itself the city of Southern charm, and the numbers back up a small town price tag. The median sale price sits around $208,000, up about 9% from the year before, while homes specifically in the 32448 zip code average closer to $162,000, nearly 23% cheaper than the Florida norm. Jackson Hospital sits right in town, though it also carries a 1-star Medicare rating, a pattern that shows up more than once in this part of the state. What draws people here isn't the hospital, it's the Chipola River and the limestone passages underneath Florida Caverns State Park, a landscape that feels closer to a national park than a retirement town, and a reason Marianna pulls in visitors who never plan to stay but end up looking at listings anyway. The appreciation here also matters. A market moving up 9% a year isn't sitting still, and buyers weighing this town against its Panhandle neighbors are watching a narrower window than they might assume. Bonifay. Bonifay is about as rural as Florida gets, with rolling clay hills and a median home price near $223,000. Cost of living sits 14% below the state average, driven largely by low municipal overhead and a farming economy that's kept land and labor cheap for generations. Doctors Memorial Hospital, a critical access facility, anchors local care, though it doesn't currently report a Medicare star rating and has had past issues with federal price transparency requirements, worth knowing before you assume every bill will be straightforward. Every October since 1944, the town has hosted the Northwest Florida Championship Rodeo, drawing a crowd from across the region and turning Bonifay into something closer to a Western heritage destination than a quiet farm town for 1 week a year. Outside that week, Bonifay stays exactly what its price suggests, a low-cost, low-overhead place to put down roots. Blountstown. Blountstown is the cheapest town on this entire list. The typical home value sits at $156,843, and the overall cost of living runs nearly 37% below the state average, the steepest discount of any Panhandle town covered here. Local buyers pay about 3 times the median household income for a home, a ratio that keeps this a genuine buyer's market rather than a bidding war. That price also puts a Blountstown buyer almost $100,000 under the exemption ceiling, meaning the 25 25-year path toward a near-zero county tax bill starts here with plenty of room to spare, more room than almost anywhere else on this list. Calhoun Liberty Hospital provides critical access emergency care, though it doesn't report a star rating due to low patient volume. The Apalachicola River runs along the town's edge, and the Panhandle Pioneer Settlement preserves what 19th century rural life here actually looked like, log cabins and all, a reminder of how little this stretch of Florida has changed. Quincy. Quincy sits about 25 miles west of Tallahassee, and its pricing splits in two directions. The average home across town runs around $178,000, but historic properties in the coveted downtown core sell for closer to $229,862, still well under the exemption line. Cost of living runs 12% under the state average. Unlike the smaller Panhandle towns, Quincy has real hospital backup nearby. Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare, a 565-bed regional hospital with a 3-star Medicare rating and a 5-star rehabilitation center, a meaningfully stronger safety net than anything else covered in this region so far. The town's 36-block historic district was built on Coca-Cola stock. Local farmers bought shares cheap in the early 1920s and turned Quincy into a town of Victorian mansions almost overnight, a piece of history that still shapes the skyline and separates Quincy visually from every other town on this list. From here, the landscape shifts east into North Florida, where the rivers get bigger and the hospital ratings jump noticeably. Live Oak. Live Oak sits along the interstate corridor in Suwannee County with a median home price around $187,888, down slightly from the year before, which has opened up some room for buyers to negotiate. Cost of living runs 18% below the Florida average. For serious medical care, residents drive about 65 miles south to UF Health Shands Hospital in Gainesville, a 5-star rated academic hospital ranked in the top 10% nationally for quality and patient safety, a tier of care that nothing in the Panhandle towns we just covered can match. Live Oak's identity, though, is built around water and music, moss-draped oaks, spring-fed rivers, and the spirit of the Suwannee Music Park, which hosts folk, bluegrass, and country festivals large enough to draw crowds from across the southeast every year. This is the first town on the list where a low price and a 5-star hospital system show up together, and it won't be the last. Palatka. Palatka sits on a wide bend of the St. Johns River with a median home price around $199,880, though newer riverfront construction can push closer to the $250,000 line. Cost of living runs 17.5% below the state average, low enough that everyday expenses, groceries, dining, routine care all stretch noticeably further than they would along the coast. HCA Florida Putnam Hospital handles local care, with the 5-star UF Health Shands Hospital in Gainesville available for cardiology, oncology, or anything more involved. Ravine Garden State Park, carved by natural springs into a series of steep ravines, and a long-standing reputation as a bass fishing destination give Palatka a character built almost entirely around its river. Buyers here should still check the newer riverfront listings against the exemption ceiling individually, since Palatka is one of the few towns on this list where the town-wide median doesn't tell the whole story. Lake City. Known as the gateway to Florida, Lake City sits at the crossing of Interstate 10 and Interstate 75, a location that's driven real price growth. The median home price has climbed to around $226,864, up roughly 12% from the year before, as retirees relocate from Miami and Tampa in growing numbers. Even with that appreciation, cost of living remains 15% under the state average, still a meaningful discount despite the demand. Healthcare here is unusually strong for a town this size. HCA Florida Lake City Hospital, a full Veterans Affairs Medical Center, and the 5-star Shands system just 45 miles south in Gainesville. More medical infrastructure packed into one small town than almost anywhere else on this list. Every February, the town holds the Olustee Battle Memorial, commemorating the largest Civil War battle fought on Florida soil, a tradition that draws reenactors and history buffs from well outside the county. That 12% price growth is worth watching, though. At this pace, Lake City could cross the exemption ceiling faster than any other town covered here. Starke. Starke's median home price sits at $231,861, with the broader Zillow Home Value Index running slightly higher at around $240,466. What stands out here is the market itself. Homes are now sitting for an average of 127 days before selling, a real cooling trend that gives buyers negotiating leverage rarely seen in growing counties like Columbia next door. Cost of living runs 12.5% below the state average. Shands Starke handles local urgent care, coordinating closely with the 5-star UF Health Shands Hospital about 25 miles away in Gainesville. Starke is known for its winter strawberries, celebrated every year at the Strawberry Festival, and for Kingsley Lake, a nearly perfectly circular lake just east of town that's become a quiet draw of its own. A cooling market next door to a rising one is an odd pairing, and it means a patient buyer here should have more leverage on price than the county-wide median suggests. Madison. Madison has the lowest home price of any town on this list, $145,363, following a price drop of more than 9% that's made this one of the most favorable buyers markets in the entire state. Cost of living runs 25% below the Florida average, the steepest discount in this entire report, meaning a fixed retirement income goes further here than in any other town covered so far. Madison County Memorial Hospital provides local care, with Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare 55 miles west for anything more involved. The town's antebellum homes and canopy roads sit close to both the Withlacoochee and Suwannee rivers, a quiet, historic setting that doesn't get much outside attention. At this price, a Madison buyer isn't just saving on the home itself, they're locking in one of the widest possible gaps between purchase price and the exemption ceiling, a gap the Save Our Homes cap will protect for decades to come, well over $100,000 of headroom that a Naples or Sarasota buyer will never see. From here, the terrain shifts south into Central Florida's citrus country, where prices start climbing back up. Wauchula. Wauchula runs along the Peace River in Hardy County, with home prices widely available under $200,000, a return to Panhandle level affordability after North Florida's steadier climb. Cost of living sits 18.5% below the state average, reflecting the town's agricultural base and its distance from any major metro. Advent Health Wauchula, a critical access hospital, provides local outpatient care and is fully compliant with federal price transparency standards, a detail that separates it from a few of the Panhandle facilities covered earlier. The Peace River itself is the real draw here, a slow, shallow waterway known for canoeing, kayaking, and for prehistoric shark teeth that wash up along its banks, earning Wauchula an odd but genuine reputation among fossil hunters who plan entire weekends around the riverbanks here. Arcadia. Arcadia carries a median home price of $211,195, with local rentals averaging around $1,500 a month for anyone testing the area before committing to a purchase. Cost of living runs 16% below the state average, a real discount against nearby coastal Sarasota County just to the west. DeSoto Memorial Hospital holds a 3-star Medicare rating, and 88% of surveyed patients say they'd recommend it to family, one of the stronger satisfaction numbers on this entire list. The town's 24-block antique district and its championship rodeo, running continuously since 1929, give Arcadia a cattle town identity that's mostly disappeared elsewhere in the state, preserved here almost by accident. For a retiree priced out of Sarasota but unwilling to give up a similar climate, Arcadia sits close enough to feel familiar while staying well under the exemption line. Avon Park. Avon Park, known locally as the City of Jacarandas, has homes ranging from around $190,000 to $275,000, with the Zillow index average settling near $215,000, meaning careful buyers can still land comfortably under the exemption threshold. Cost of living sits 15.5% under the state average, and property taxes stay low thanks to modest millage rates across Highlands County. Advent Health Sebring, just 10 miles south, provides regional care and meets federal quality and transparency standards. Every spring, purple blooming jacaranda trees line the town's mile-long downtown promenade, a detail distinctive enough that it's built directly into the town's name and identity, and freshwater lakes like Lake Verona round out the setting. The price range here is wide enough that it's worth being deliberate. The lower end keeps every advantage of the exemption system intact, while the upper end starts closing the same door that Okeechobee, further south, has already shut. Frostproof. Frostproof sits between Lake Clinch and Lake Reedy, with a typical home value around $219,475, close enough to the exemption ceiling that it's worth confirming the exact assessed value before assuming eligibility. Cost of living runs 14% below the state average. Polk County offers a $50,000 senior tax exemption locally, stacking directly on top of the state homestead exemption for residents who qualify, a real local advantage not every county on this list provides. Advent Health Lake Wales, 15 miles north, carries a 3-star rating and handles cardiology and geriatric care. Citrus groves surround the town on nearly every side, and in winter the air fills with the scent of orange blossoms, a seasonal detail residents mention more than almost anything else about living here. Between the local exemption and the still reasonable price, Frostproof stacks two separate advantages that most towns on this list only offer one of. Okeechobee. Okeechobee sits at the northern tip of Florida's largest lake, and it's the one town on this list where the tax math shifts. The median home price here is $260,997, just over the $250,000 exemption ceiling. Cost of living is only 8% below the state average, the smallest discount of any town covered so far, reflecting Okeechobee's popularity as a sport fishing destination and its closeness to the wealthier Treasure Coast. A buyer here still gets the standard homestead exemption and the Save Our Homes cap, just not the full 25-year path to zero that towns like Madison or Blountstown offer. Rawlerson Hospital anchors local care, working alongside the Okeechobee Healthcare Facility to cover more comprehensive senior needs. What Okeechobee sells instead is the lake itself, base fishing, boating, and access to the Lake Okeechobee Scenic Trail, drawing anglers from across the country regardless of the tax math. It's worth sitting with this one for a moment because it's the clearest example on this entire list of what happens once a town crosses that $250,000 line. From here, the towns get smaller again, and the hospital ratings jump as we move into the Nature Coast. Chiefland. Chiefland's median home value sits at $173,839, with listings typically running between $160,000 and $220,000, a tight, predictable range that makes budgeting simple. Cost of living runs 20% below the state average, driven by Levy County's rural economy and low municipal fees. The nearest major hospital is 40 miles west, the 5-star UF Health Shands Hospital in Gainesville, one of the highest-rated academic health systems in the country, and a level of care well above anything available directly in town. Manatee Springs State Park is the reason people know Chiefland at all, a first-magnitude spring that becomes a winter refuge for West Indian manatees, drawing visitors who often leave with a very different impression of rural Florida than they arrived with. This is the first of 5 Nature Coast towns on this list, and all 5 share the same hospital system, which starts to matter more with each one. Williston. Williston sits among horse farms and open pasture in northern Levy County, with a median home price of $230,000, though larger equestrian properties with real acreage can run higher. Cost of living sits 14.5% below the state average, and property taxes stay noticeably lower here than in more urbanized counties nearby. The 5-star Shands Hospital in Gainesville is only 25 miles northeast, among the closest access points to elite care found anywhere on this list. Underneath the pastures, Williston sits on limestone formations that have created Devil's Den and Blue Grotto, prehistoric spring systems that draw scuba divers from well outside Florida, an unexpected draw for a town otherwise known for horses. Between the acreage, the price, and the drive to Gainesville, Williston asks for a slightly larger budget than its Nature Coast neighbors, but returns more land for it. Trenton. Trenton, the county seat of Gilchrist County, has homes ranging from about $220,000 to $260,000, meaning most buyers land safely under the exemption threshold, though the upper end of that range requires some attention. Cost of living runs 16% below the state average, keeping day-to-day expenses manageable in a genuinely family-oriented setting. Gainesville's 5-star Shands Hospital sits 30 miles east, well within reach for anything beyond routine care. Trenton calls itself the quilt capital of Florida, with a historic train depot and a downtown quilt shop that anchor a town otherwise defined by its access to the Suwannee River wilderness just outside the city limits. The pace of the town matches its size. Gilchrist County has no traffic light of any real consequence, and locals measure distance in minutes rather than miles, a small detail that matters more once you've spent a decade driving anywhere else in the state. Retirees who settle here tend to mention the same thing. Fewer errands eat up the day, which leaves more of it for the river. Trenton is the second town on this list, after Frostproof, where the price range straddles the exemption line closely enough that the specific home matters more than the town average. Bronson. Bronson, the administrative seat of Levy County, has a median sold price around $185,000, with fixer-upper properties available well under $100,000 for buyers willing to take on some renovation. Cost of living sits 19% below the state average. The 5-star Shands Hospital in Gainesville is about 25 miles away, keeping Bronson inside the same reliable healthcare radius as its Levy County neighbors. The surrounding Goethe State Forest covers 53,000 acres of cypress swamp and equestrian trail, and it's one of the few places left in the state with a stable population of red-cockaded woodpeckers, a detail that draws birders as much as retirees. Bronson stays small on purpose. There's no major commercial strip pulling development toward the highway, which keeps the town center walkable and keeps property taxes low, almost as a side effect of having so little infrastructure to fund. For a buyer comfortable trading amenities for acreage and quiet, the math here works from nearly every angle at once. Of the 5 Nature Coast towns on this list, Bronson pairs the lowest price with the same 5-star hospital access as the rest, a combination that's harder to find than it sounds. Dunnellon. Dunnellon sits right at the edge of the exemption threshold, with a median home price of roughly $250,000, meaning eligibility for the full 25-year exemption depends on the exact assessed value in the year of purchase, not just the townwide average. Cost of living runs 11% below the state average, still a real discount against nearby Ocala, where prices have been climbing. Advent Health Ocala handles regional care, with the 5-star Shands Hospital in Gainesville about 45 miles north as backup for anything more serious. Dunnellon sits at the confluence of 2 rivers, the dark, tannic Withlacoochee and the clear, spring-fed Rainbow River, meeting at a single point just outside town, a setting that closes out this list on some of the most distinctive water access found anywhere on it. That confluence has made Dunnellon one of the more popular tubing and kayaking destinations in the region, which brings in seasonal visitors and, with them, a slightly more developed downtown than some of its Nature Coast neighbors. It's a trade worth naming directly: more restaurants, more shops, and a livelier calendar of small-town events against a home price that leaves far less margin before crossing the exemption line than towns like Bronson or Chiefland just up the road. Sitting exactly on the exemption line, Dunnellon is the clearest reminder on this entire list that a town-wide median is a starting point, not a guarantee. Line these 20 towns up next to each other and a pattern shows up that has nothing to do with charm or scenery. North Florida and the Nature Coast keep landing near the same 5-star hospital in Gainesville, while several Panhandle towns settle for 1-star ratings and a longer drive when something serious comes up. Central Florida prices are creeping upward, close enough that a town like Okeechobee has already crossed the exemption line that towns like Madison and Blountstown are nowhere near, and towns like Frostproof, Trenton, and Dunnellon sit close enough to that same line that the specific home, not the town average, ends up deciding the outcome. None of these towns are secret. They show up in county records and listings same as anywhere else. What separates them isn't discovery, it's a purchase price that happens to fall on the right side of a number written into Florida law, and a hospital rating that either backs that price up or asks you to drive for it. That trade-off isn't going away either. Florida's population keeps skewing older every year, and small counties that once had no reason to raise assessments are starting to feel pressure from buyers priced out of the coasts. A town sitting comfortably under the exemption line today isn't guaranteed to stay there for long, which is part of why places like Chipley and Blountstown, with the widest cushion on this list, carry a different kind of value than places like Dunnellon or Frostproof, sitting right on the edge of it. If this list has a single takeaway, it's this: run the numbers before you fall for the scenery, not after. None of this replaces sitting down with a county property appraiser's office and asking directly what a specific home is assessed at the year you buy it, because listing prices and assessed values don't always match, and the exemption only cares about one of them. The same goes for hospital ratings, which shift from year to year as Medicare updates its data, so a one-star facility today isn't necessarily a one-star facility in 5 years, and the reverse is just as true. What this list offers is a starting map, not a final answer. 20 places worth a closer look before the wider search narrows down to one. 20 towns, 4 regions, and in nearly every case, the same 2 questions decide which side of that line you end up on, what the home costs the day you buy it, and how far you're willing to drive when it matters.